Hello my friends, I have a very special video for you today. We're gonna be checking out and covering the 8 steps that I think you need to mix a song from start to finish. My goal with this guide is that you can have a clear path to follow when mixing a song from start to finish. Also, I wanna provide you and inform you of free plugins that I use all the time and I recommend 100% to work on your mixes. Another reason for this video is to celebrate the first year of my website amnerhunter.com, where week to week I have been working hard to provide you and to give you tools and knowledge and content that can help you out on your music production journey. I'm very happy that you're part of this and I thank you very much for sticking here. I'm very happy of the community that I have built here on YouTube, and I want to continue to improve and to make a better experience for you and to keep sharing good stuff and valuable stuff for you. Make sure to stick around till the end of the video. I have some important announcements that I want to make. Also, I have a new resource for you completely free. My name is Amner Hunter from amnerhunter.com, the place where you can get tons of free resources, content, and tools for music production. Thank you very much for being here and welcome. Like I mentioned, my friends, I have a new PDF guide for you. Let me introduce you the 8-step mixing checklist using free plugins. This PDF guide can be yours right now. Just go to amnerhunter.com to the section of free guides and you're gonna have access to this PDF guide right now. All of the applicable links are going to be down below in the description and first comment. Without further ado, let's get now to the video. I tried to make this as simplest as possible for you, my friends. I condensed this into 8 steps. This is literally how I mix the system that I have developed through the years of experience that I have, that I use every time and works for me every time, and I'm sure that it will work for you. This step-by-step process that I follow in every mix from start to finish to get better results, to have a better use of my time, and also to have more fun in the process, that I think is very important. Now, this is not the only way, obviously, of mixing a song, but I have found that these 8 steps are simple and very powerful. Let's go to step number 1, which is organize your session, right? This is before importing the tracks, before moving the faders, adding any plugins. Organize your session. Before you import any of the tracks of the song, set and configure the sample rate and bit depth of your project. For instance, I use 24 bits, 44.1 kilohertz. Some engineers use 48 kilohertz. Make sure to set this up on your session and of course take into account the files that you are importing. Check with the engineer that sent you or with the band that sent you the files what is the sample rate and bit depth they used to record those tracks. If you recorded the tracks yourself, you know what this information is based on your interface, right? Based on the sample rate and bit depth that your interface is configured. Another thing is to organize the tracks from top to bottom and left to right in the mixer. I recommend you to start with the drums, for instance, and then move on with the bass instruments, then with the guitars or synths, and the vocals. Lastly, I start with the kick drum, the snare, the toms, the hi-hats, the overheads, guitars, and the vocals last, alright? Top to bottom, left to right. Another thing very important is that you group these instruments into categories, right? Let's say all of the drum tracks make a stereo group track or bus track, where you send all of the individual parts of the drum kit to that stereo bus or group. And also very important to color code the individual tracks and the group tracks for you to be able to be more agile and to move faster on the session. For instance, I use color blue for all of the drum tracks, color green for all of the guitar tracks. That way, when you are searching for an instrument, it will be easier for you. The group tracks, I like to color code it in yellow. So in that way, I can differentiate between the individual tracks, the categories, and the group tracks or bus tracks. Also, some DAWs don't have a master fader by default. In Cubase, we do have a master fader. That's the final bus where every track is being routed to. In Pro Tools, you need to create all of these tracks. So this is the time, if your DAW doesn't come with a master stereo output, create one and send all of the individual tracks to the group tracks and the group or buses to that final stereo mix bus or master track. Also, this is a good opportunity to rename the tracks. Instead of being like guitar 01, take 2, etc., etc., just put like guitar left, guitar right, snare, kick, tom 1, and the group tracks as well. You can put like, for instance, drum bass or drum group or guitar bass. Very important, you will work more efficiently on your session. Lastly, you can set up markers to build the skeleton of the song, where you mark, for instance, the intro, you set up a marker there, the first verse, the first chorus, the bridge of the song, the guitar solo, and you're gonna be moving and identifying the part of the song quicker. We move on to step number 2, which is gain staging. This simply means that you are making sure that you are not overloading your mix bus or master bus in terms of levels of volume, right? You're not in reds. The peaks of your tracks are not in reds. Also, make sure that the individual tracks are not peaking on red numbers. This also has to do with how the recording was made. That's why it's very important to not record at super hot levels. That's why the gain knob on your interface is very useful. To bring down the gain of hot tracks or loud tracks, just use clip gain. Every DAW has this function in some way. Don't bring down the fader, bring down the gain, the actual waveform of the tracks. Just use clip gain to lower it a bit. In that way, you're gonna prevent your tracks from peaking too high on the individual tracks and on the master bus as well. I suggest you to shoot for like 75% of the track all the way up, peaks at 75% of all that space that you have. Always watch out for the master fader or the mix bus. Make sure that the highest peaks are at -6 decibels, -5 at the most. You don't need levels more than that on your master bus. Now we move on with step number 3, which is the static mix. Here I recommend you to loop a part of the song where it's the most busy part, where most elements of the mix are working together. So create a loop in that part, play the song, listen a few times. This is the first part of the song that you're gonna be mixing more in depth using the faders and the pond pots of your tracks. Also, this is a good opportunity to make the decision of where are you going to put the instruments in the stereo field. You can put guitars on the right, on the left, the kick drum, snare, vocals in the middle always. You start to make these decisions and prioritize some instruments only using the volume faders and the pond pots. The way I like to start this is I bring all the faders down and I start to bring up the fader. Let's say the kick drum is the first track, then the snare. I start to put the volumes where I like it. I go one by one, bringing up the faders where I like the balance and the volume, and also always checking and making sure that I'm not overloading the mix bus or the master fader. Here you need to pretend that plugins and effects don't exist. You have to make the song sound amazing only using faders and panning, nothing more. You can set yourself a timer. This shouldn't take more than half an hour. I recommend you to trust your instinct, trust your taste, make decisions and move on. We move on with step number 4, which is mix bus processing. By starting to process your mix bus, your master fader, you're gonna shorten your time of mixing. And also you're gonna save a lot of CPU power. This process of starting in the top of the mix and going down to the bottom of the mix, it's called top-down mixing. This is a technique and a process that I follow for years. The first process that I like to do here on the mix bus is using equalization. Just limit yourself to 2-3 moves at the most on the equalizer just to enhance the mix a little bit. Also, you can get rid of problematic frequencies right here from the start. I recommend you 1-2 decibel moves on this process because every move that you make here, let's remember that you are affecting all of the individual tracks, all of the channels. Also, by doing these minor adjustments, you are impacting the whole picture. You are putting your perspective on the whole song. Rather than be very surgical on individual elements, you start at the top. In general, these moves will come a long way, I promise. Use equalizers to remove bad stuff and to enhance the good stuff. What we are looking for here is just to open up the highs a bit to bring more clarity to the mix. You can put a high shelf at around 5K or 6K. You can also enhance the low end of your mix by boosting 1 or 2 decibels at around 80 Hz on the mix. Also, it's a good opportunity to remove some problematic frequencies that are on the low-mid area around 500 Hz. By doing these 3 moves at the most, you are enhancing a lot the mix. Trust me. Also consider here after the EQ the use of a compressor just to glue the mix a little bit. Consider using a slow attack and a fast release, and just look for 1 to 4 decibels of gain reduction. We are looking for only control the dynamics a bit and glue the mix all together. Always very important, make sure to level match the input and output of the plugins. Don't make decisions based on the volume of something. Level match input and output, and in that way you're gonna be hearing what the processing is doing and not only making decisions based on volume, because we can perceive louder as better, and that's not necessarily the case. After the compressor, now it could be a good opportunity to bring a saturator plugin, a tape emulation plugin. With subtle moves you can add a little bit of character, and also what saturation does is it compresses the signal a bit so it can glue the mix more. Also it can give the mix more dimension, it can create like a new vibe to the song. Very cool. We move on to step number 5, which is the use of EQ. I suggest you to start with subtractive EQ. Experiment with equalization on your group tracks or your buses. Again, use equalizers subtly to remove the bad stuff and to enhance the good stuff. A great way to start EQing your tracks is with a high pass filter or a low cut filter, whatever you want to call it. Try using a high pass filter on the instruments that don't need a lot of low-end information, right? The guitars, the vocals, the pianos maybe, backing vocals, etc., the snare, the toms maybe. In that way you are carving out some space for the kick drum and the bass guitar to live. Also you can do the opposite, you can insert a low pass filter or high cut where you can cut the highs of some instruments that don't need all that much information, for instance rhythm guitars or the bass guitar for instance. So in that way you are carving out space for the elements to work better in a mix. Also in this step I like to prioritize the kick drum and the bass, which one is going to be in the lowest part of the spectrum, right? So for instance if I prioritize the kick drum, I'm gonna cut at around 40 Hz, and the bass guitar I'm gonna cut around 60 Hz, right? So in that way I'm prioritizing and giving each instrument a little bit of space. After that I move on with the guitars, for instance at around 80, 90, 100 Hz depending on the needs. So in that way I'm giving space to each element in the mix, and they're gonna work better in the low end, which is one of the most difficult parts of the mix. One easy way to find out which frequency to remove or which problematic frequency is, you can boost with the equalizer a curve and you can sweep around to find problematic frequencies. Then you can bring down that band of the equalizer and remove a little bit of that annoying or problematic frequencies. Also consider narrow cuts and wider boosts to sound more natural. Let's move on with the next step, which is compression. Here we use compression to control the dynamics primarily of the tracks. By dynamics I mean the loudest part of the track and the quietest part of the track. So with compression we control this and we can even out and adjust these levels to have a more consistent signal. Some of the elements of the mix that usually need compression are dynamic instruments such as the vocals, it's very dynamic, the percussive elements, the drums, the kick drum, the snare, the toms. Also the bass guitar is very dynamic, so we can control that with the compressor. Acoustic guitars, clean guitars for instance as well. Instruments that are very rich in transients or peaks, spikes. Also I like the use of compression to create more punch, more smack to some elements in the mix. Also with compression you can bring more emotion or more urgency to certain tracks of the song. Consider the use of compression on the group tracks as well. First, before going to the individual tracks, I like to use compression also on the group tracks. Experiment with faster or slower attack times or release times as well. You're gonna start to getting familiar with the sound and what the compression is doing to any track in the mix. Just experiment. One last thing to consider here is that I like to use compressors after the equalizers. This is not the only rule, of course this is not a written in stone rule, but that's how I prefer to do it. Just go with whatever works better for you and don't look back, just move on. Then we move on with step number 7, which is effects such as reverbs and delays. Consider using these effects in auxiliary tracks or FX tracks. Consider using sends. Every DAW has this function. Instead of using these effects on inserts and individual channels, by putting them on auxiliary tracks or sends, you're gonna have more CPU power at your disposal because you can send different tracks of your mix to just one reverb. You can control with the send level how much of that signal is being sent, right? How much of the dry and wet signal. Very cool by doing it this way. Also consider EQing your effects. You can put after the reverb a high pass filter and low pass filter. Consider cutting some of those low end and high end frequencies. That way you're gonna help the reverb to have another character and to not clash a lot with the original signal. Also, when it comes to delay effects, I like to use a high pass filter and low pass filter so that the echoes of the plugin don't compete with the original signal. Very cool to use an EQ after the effects. The good thing is that actually some plugins have a built-in equalizer, so you can put these filters within the Reverb plugin. You don't need to insert it afterwards on the chain. And let's move on to the last step in this checklist, which is automation and sweetening. Now with EQ, compression and effects on your mix, it's time to make the mix more interesting from beginning to end. This is where automation and sweetening come into place. For instance, you can use volume automation to help the compressor on the vocals, just to make sure that every word, every phrase that the singer is singing, that you can hear everything properly. Also, you can automate the pan pots. You can put in different parts of the stereo field certain tracks, move them here and there, bring them to the center or bring them to the sides, just so that you can create contrast on the mix from beginning to end. Also, you can automate the transitions of the song. You can automate the fills of the drums, for instance. Some fills can get lost in the mix, so you can automate and bring the volume of that part only and then bring it down. Also, you can automate the effects, the delays, so that only they are active on the tails of the words, not in every word. Another thing very cool that I like to do often is to automate the volume of the choruses. I can add 1 decibel extra in the chorus and then bring down that decibel on the verses. That way you can create contrast and you can maintain the listener more interested from beginning to end. Just giving you some ideas here where you can use automation and sweetening. Of course, there are tons of things that you can automate, but that depends on your creativity. So just go ahead and experiment with it. It will be very cool. I have some bonus tips for you, my friends. Consider the use of checking your mixes in mono. So if you make your mix sound balanced and that everything has its place in mono, when you open it up to stereo, it will sound better, and you are making sure that your mix will translate better in other systems out there in the real world. Also, it's very important that you bring to your projects reference tracks, commercial mixes, commercial songs of professional bands that you like and enjoy. Pull to your session a song that is similar to yours. Then you can check the balances, the volumes, the equalization, the brightness, the low end. You are not mixing blindly. You are mixing with a perspective of what sounds good out there. I'm not saying that you match exactly your mix with the other sonically, but use it as a reference to improve your mix. And finally, my friends, if you don't plan to send the song to master with someone else and you're gonna master your song, just put a limiter at the end of the chain in the master bus or mix bus. Set a ceiling of, let's say, -1 decibel and start to lowering the threshold so that the volume and the loudness of the track start to increase, so that you can get your track to a more commercial level in terms of loudness. Just go for 3 to 4 decibels of gain reduction on the attenuation control. To achieve better results following these 8 steps in checklist, I recommend you this free VST plugin, my friends. First, I have the MV meter from the company TV Pro Audio. This is the meter that I use to check on my peaks, to check on the average loudness of my song. To check my mixes in mono, I like to use this plugin It's called Manipulator. It's free as well for Mac and Windows. I like to use this EQ very much on the master bus and also on the group tracks. This is the Slick EQ. It adds very cool coloration to the sound. This is the saturation plugin that I like to use after the compressor on the master bus. This is the Voxengo tube amp. It's also very effective to use it on the individual tracks or in the group tracks. And this is one of my favorite bus compressors. This is the Buster SE from Analog Obsession. I use it mostly on the mix bus and on the group tracks as well, or buses. This is the equalizer that I use for more surgical moves on the individual channels. This one is called M Equalizer from Melda Production Audio. This is my favorite free compressor for individual channels. This is also from the company Melda Production Audio. As far as effects goes, this is the Valhalla Supermassive, a delay reverb plugin in one. And as far as delay goes, I like to use the Baby Comeback from the company Baby Audio. Very simple to use. It does everything that I need to bring more space, more depth. And finally, this is the limiter that I like to use to master the track, let's say. Many uses and benefits that you can get from this cool limiter called Loudmax. All of this information, my friends, in case that you want to have it in a PDF guide, it's available for free in my website, amnohunter.com/free. I'm gonna leave the link down below. Everything is there, every step by step, every bullet point is there. The links to get these plugins are there. So this is the new free resource that I have for you, my friends, that I'm sure that it will help you a lot. Like I mentioned in the intro of the video, my friends, I have several announcements to make. I'm gonna make a video series here on YouTube where I'm gonna be answering some of your questions more in depth. Also, I'm gonna be reviewing and critiquing constructively, of course, your mixes. If you wanna be part of this, if you have a question that maybe needs a deeper answer, just download this PDF guide that I'm giving you for free. On the email that you get, just reply with the question and I'm gonna make sure to answer it in a future video. Also, if you have a mix, a song, and you want some constructive criticism and some mix critique from myself, just download this PDF guide and on the email just reply with the MP3 file. Final announcement, my friends, I'm working finally on my first course. This is a mixing metal course. I'm gonna be covering in depth these steps that I follow, showing you and helping you out in a mix from start to finish to bring that mix to a professional level. It would help me a lot to build this course, to know what are the areas where you struggle the most or are the most difficult for you when it comes to mixing a song from beginning to end. You can leave your comments down below with your ideas, with your opinions, or you can shoot me an email. I'm gonna be happy to be hearing from you. So there you go, my friends. I hope that you enjoyed this video. Download that PDF guide. It's totally free. It's live right now on my website. Thank you very much for being here. I'm gonna continue to make great content for you. Thanks a lot for watching and I'll see you very soon on the next one. All right, take care.